Welcome to the deep dive. We cut through the noise to get you those crucial nuggets of knowledge. So picture this, a world that feels like it's constantly shifting, geopolitical tremors, economic upheavals, technology just leaping forward. People often call it a polycrisis, don't they? It's a real whirlwind. So for a big trading nation like the UK, the massive question is, how do you actually navigate all that turbulence? How do you not just survive, but really thrive?
That's a fundamental question, absolutely. And it's one the UK government has, well, clearly tackled head on. For this deep dive, we've really dug into the UK's new trade strategy. It just went to Parliament in June 2025. You can sort of think of it as the government's compass, really, for finding its way through these pretty stormy global waters.
Right. And that's our mission today, isn't it? To unpack this strategy for you, we want to pull out the most important insights, the practical bits, basically give you a shortcut to understanding how the UK plans to stay an open trading nation, aiming for growth and security in this, well, rapidly changing world. We'll look at the big picture, but also the specific things they're doing. Let's dive right in. Okay, first up, let's set the scene. That global backdrop. We've definitely seen a major shift, haven't we?
We certainly have. The whole global trading system seems to be moving. It used to be about convergence, economies getting closer.
Yeah.
Now it feels more like divergence, forces pulling things apart. We're shifting from maybe a unipolar world, one main superpower, to something more multipolar. You've got these rising middle powers now alongside the traditional big players.
And it's not just abstract shifts, is it? Crises like COVID, the war in Ukraine, they haven't happened in isolation.
Exactly. They've kind of combined to create this polycrisis.
Yeah.
It's not just, one bad thing after another. It's interconnected problems that really ramp up the anxiety about, well, can we rely on supplies? What about the cost? Things like energy, defense, even medical stuff.
And layering onto that, protectionism is definitely growing. Our sources say trade restrictive policies actually quadrupled between 2015 and 2023.
Quadrupled. That's huge.
It really is. And that puts serious pressure on the old ways of doing things, multilateral talks, universal rules for trade.
Precisely. So in this shifting landscape, where does the UK fit? I mean, it's still the world's sixth largest economy. That's according to the IMF figures from April 2025. And trade is huge for the UK. About 60% of its GDP in 2024 was total trade. But it's not without its challenges.
No, definitely not. You hear about the persistent issues, don't you? Productivity lower than many peers, maybe less investment than needed. And those regional gaps outside London and the Southeast, they're still very real.
Yeah, and there's a telling statistic, too. If you look at total trade growth between 2018 and 2024, the G7 average was about 8%.
Okay.
The UK's growth, only about 4% in that same period, so roughly half. And there's been a particular weakness flagged in goods trade.
Which makes the UK's strength in services even more crucial, I suppose. That whole services superpower status.
Exactly. That's strategically vital. The UK is the world's second biggest services exporter. UNCTAD confirmed that in 2023. Last year, we're talking services exports worth over £500 billion. That's significantly more than goods exports.
$500 billion. Wow. And what kind of services are we mainly talking about?
Well, the big ones are professional and business services and financial services. Together, they made up over half of all services exports last year. And the strategy points out some key advantages here. Services trade is booming worldwide. It's generally less hit by tariffs on physical goods.
Right. Makes sense.
Plus, you've got English as a global business language and UK law being widely used. That helps. And get this, 3.2 million jobs in the UK are directly linked to exporting digital services. That's a massive workforce involved.
That's a huge number, a real competitive edge there.
Absolutely. But the strategy is clear. It's not just about services. Manufacturing is still seen as incredibly important, particularly for spreading prosperity more evenly across the UK nations.
Oh, so?
Well, take gross value added, GVA. Manufacturing accounts for about 16% of GVA in Wales, compared to maybe 9% in England. So you see its regional weight.
Okay, yeah, I see. And the industrial strategy identified key growth areas too, didn't it?
It did. Things like advanced manufacturing, defense, clean energy, life sciences. Just look at clean energy manufacturing. McKinsey reckons there are opportunities worth potentially £1 trillion for UK businesses between 2021 and 2030.
£1 trillion, that's enormous potential.
It really is. And then, of course, there's AI, artificial intelligence. The UK's AI market right now, about 5.8 billion GVA, supporting around 60,000 jobs.
And the potential future impact?
Well, the IMF estimates that widespread AI adoption could boost annual productivity growth by up to 1.5%. Over a decade, that could be worth something like £47 billion to the UK economy each year. So AI isn't just a sector, it's potentially a lever to boost productivity across the board, which, is key given those historical challenges.
That makes total sense. And this forward-looking stuff must heavily influence how the UK handles its trade landscape after leaving the EU.
Definitely. The strategy is quite upfront about it. It acknowledges that, well, proximity counts in trade. The EU is the UK's closest and biggest market.
And the data shows some shifts since Brexit.
It does. Between 2018 and 2024, trade with the EU dropped by roughly 2%, but interestingly, trade with the rest of the world went up by about 9% in the same period.
Okay, so a divergence there too. What about businesses?
Yeah, survey evidence does suggest more challenges for businesses exporting to the EU. Some estimates suggest around 16,400 businesses stopped exporting there since Brexit.
16,000? That's quite a stark number. How has services trade fared with the EU?
Interestingly, services trade has actually done better in absolute terms. It's up about 12% since 2018. But it's not without friction. Things like getting professional qualifications recognized, that's still a hurdle sometimes.
So what's the strategy's approach to the EU relationship now?
Well, the emphasis is very much on strengthening ties and making trade easier. But, and this is a key point, without rejoining the single market or the customs union, they're pointing to some recent progress too. That UK-EU summit in May 2025.
What came out of that?
An agreement on SPS measures sanitary and phytosanitary standards. That should ease checks on agri-food products, which can be a big headache. There's also a new deal to link up emissions trading systems, the ETS. And they're looking into more energy cooperation.
And they've agreed to meet regularly.
Yes, annual UK-EU summits. The idea is to keep the dialogue going and maximize cooperation where possible. So it's about optimizing the current relationship.
Okay, so moving beyond the EU, how is the UK approaching the rest of the world? You mentioned strategic partnerships and this nimble trade toolkit.
Right. Given that fragmented world we talked about, the strategy argues for pragmatism. Basically, prioritize the markets with the biggest growth potential. Don't try to, trade everything everywhere all at once. Focus resources.
Makes sense. How are they categorizing these priority markets?
They've grouped them. You've got the global pillars. That's the EU, US, India, China, big hitters. Then regional hubs like Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Brazil, Japan, Germany, Turkey. After that, established, influential, and growing importers, Australia, South Korea, Singapore. And finally, emerging markets, focusing on places like Bangladesh and Indonesia.
So it seems like while North America and Europe are still huge in value, there's a definite eye on growth in Asia and the Middle East.
Exactly. That's where a lot of the future growth is expected.
Yeah.
And the strategy goes into detail on some key relationships. The EU, obviously, still indispensable. $813 billion in total trade in 2024. You can't ignore that.
Absolutely.
And the U.S., huge. $315 billion two-way trade in 2024. That's nearly a fifth of all UK trade, and they highlight that economic deal struck in May 2025 as a big win. It helps protect jobs in key sectors, automotive, steel, aerospace. We're talking over 320,000 jobs across the UK supported by those sectors. Plus, they're pushing for a big tech partnership with the US.
What about China? Always a complex relationship.
Very nuanced approach there. China is the fifth largest single trading partner, about 6% of UK trade in 2024, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs. So the strategy talks about capitalizing on opportunities, but at the same time, being really careful about protecting national security and also renewing political engagement.
In India, there's a lot of talk about the free trade agreement.
Yes, highlighted as a landmark deal. The projections are pretty significant. Increase bilateral trade by $25.5 billion, boost UK GDP by £4.8 billion, potentially lift wages by £2.2 billion a year in the long run.
Are there any concrete examples of its impact yet?
Well, they give one example. A UK manufacturer, Coltraco Ultrasonics, apparently secured a 20-ship contract with an Indian state-owned firm pretty much right after the FTA was announced.
Okay, so a direct link there.
It shows that tangible impact. And this all feeds into a bigger shift mentioned in the strategy. Moving away from just focusing on big, comprehensive, free trade agreements, or FTAs.
Towards what?
Towards using a broader mix of tools, a more flexible toolkit, basically aiming for faster, maybe deeper progress in specific areas.
Right, that varied trade policy toolkit. What does that include?
Well, things like digital trade agreements, DPAs. These are designed to stop digital trade barriers popping up, make digital exports easier. The UK-Ukraine DTA from September 2024 is a good example, helping Ukraine rebuild digitally. And they're talking to Brazil, Thailand, Kenya, Malaysia about similar deals.
Interesting. What else is in the toolkit?
Sector-specific agreements, so really drilling down into particular industries, like the Bern Financial Services Agreement with Switzerland due early 2026. That's meant to cut through regulatory complexity for UK financial firms operating there. And as we mentioned, lots of focus on clean energy industries too.
And I saw something about mutual recognition agreements, MRAs, and professional qualifications.
Yes, MRAs and MRPQs. These tackle those tricky beyond-the-border barriers, essentially agreeing that another country's product regulations or professional qualifications are equivalent to the UK's. There's a really good case study. The UK-US MRA for engineers. It helps engineers get licensed more easily in 27 US states already. And the potential. If it worked across all states, it could unlock maybe 700 million to almost £1 billion in extra UK exports over 5 years.
Wow, that's tackling real practical barriers for people.
Exactly. Removing friction. They're also looking at regional agreements on rules of origin, ROOs. Things like joining the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention, the PEM Convention. That could mean simpler paperwork, more flexibility for UK exporters about where their components come from.
So simplifying the admin side.
Pretty much. Plus, they're using international investment agreements and more flexible things like Memoranda of Understanding MOUs. They mention MOUs with Taiwan and an economic growth partnership with Indonesia. These can promote investment or address very specific sector needs quickly.
And then there's this new Ricardo Fund. Sounds intriguing.
It is quite innovative. Named after David Ricardo, the economist. It's a fund specifically set up to systematically identify and remove regulatory barriers, stopping UK businesses trading overseas. The pilot, called the Regulatory Partnerships for Growth Fund, has some eye-catching projections. They expect it to unlock £5 billion in export opportunities over 5 years.
For what cost?
For an initial cost of just £2.3 million in the first year.
Seriously, that's an incredible return.
It works out at something like 135% exports for every pound invested in that first year. A massive potential return. And it ties into research by BSI, the standards body. They reckon about 6.1 billion of extra UK exports each year come from being compatible with other countries' standards.
So aligning standards really pays off.
It seems so. There's an example of UK support helping Brazil and Colombia develop offshore wind regulations, which has apparently already opened doors for tens of millions of pounds in potential UK exports.
Okay, so this toolkit is quite broad. What does it all mean for businesses day to day? How do they access support?
Well, the government says it's moving to a digital-first approach for export support. They're integrating it into a new business growth service. The idea is to make it a one-stop shop, easier to navigate.
And they're promoting UK businesses abroad.
Yeah, through campaigns like Made in the UK, Sold to the World, and showing up on the ground too, like leading that first joint trade mission to Kyiv with the Netherlands and Norway back in February 2025. That sends a clear signal of support and commercial diplomacy.
And there's a whole network supporting this.
Absolutely. You've got the HM trade commissioners, the whole overseas diplomatic network doing commercial diplomacy, and crucially, UK Export Finance UKEF. That's the government's export credit agency. Its capacity has been massively increased from 20 billion up to 80 billion.
80 billion. What's the goal there?
They aim to support over 12.5 billion worth of export contracts by 2029. And there's a real focus on helping SMEs, smaller companies, get exporting. They mentioned examples like MaxFlow and DINS.
And you mentioned clean energy earlier.
Yes, UKEF has a big commitment there too. 10 billion of clean growth finance by 2029. Really trying to harness those global clean energy markets.
Okay, so lots of focus on exports, but the strategy must cover imports too, right? They're important.
Absolutely fundamental. Imports are vital for consumers, obviously, but also critical inputs for businesses. And they let the whole economy specialize, which boosts efficiency. Something like 26% of UK imports actually get used in producing UK exports. It's all interconnected.
So are they doing anything to make importing smoother, the border, for instance?
Yes, the strategy talks quite a bit about making the UK goods border more efficient, more predictable. That includes investing heavily in the new Customs Declaration Service, CDS, and a clear commitment to eventually having a single trade window where businesses can submit all their information just once.
That sounds like it would make a difference. Any other border innovations?
Well, this is quite cutting edge. The Electronic Trade Documents Act from 2023. The UK was actually the first G7 country to put electronic trade documents legally on par with paper ones.
Really? What impact is that having?
Early pilots are showing pretty remarkable results. Things like a 40% cut in shipment times, nearly 90% fewer paper documents needed, 90% fewer emails flying back and forth.
Wow, that's streamlining things significantly.
Massively. And the LSE, the London School of Economics, estimates that if the whole world adopted electronic trade documents, it could boost UK GDP by almost 1%. That's huge potential from just digitizing paperwork.
A real game changer. Okay, this brings us towards the end. Security, resilience, accountability. Core themes, it seems.
Definitely. The strategy acknowledges that being open, while vital, also creates vulnerabilities. Unfair competition, supply chain shocks. So there's a new supply chain center being set up in the Department for Business and Trade. Its job is specifically to build resilience, working closely with businesses.
Are they supporting specific industries for resilience?
Yes, supporting key investments. Like Vishay Intertechnology putting $250 million into a semiconductor plant in Newport, Wales. That's expected to create over 500 high-skilled jobs, but also crucially strengthens those critical semiconductor supply chains here in the UK.
And using economic tools for security.
Right. Things like screening investments under the National Security and Investment Act, plus using export controls and sanctions when needed. And they also plan to beef up trade defense measures to counter unfair practices like dumping,
Selling goods too cheaply abroad.
exactly below production cost, or countering distortionary subsidies from other countries. They use the UK steel industry as a case study, facing massive global overcapacity, about 12 million tons worldwide. So they're looking at measures to protect it, including a call for evidence on steel trade measures.
So protecting domestic industry while engaging globally. What about values? Accountable trade.
Yeah, that's a big strand. Integrating climate goals is key, actively promoting trade in environmental goods and services. And that carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, coming in from 2027, that's basically an environmental tax on imports from places with weaker climate policies to stop emissions just shifting elsewhere.
And labor rights. Responsible business.
Strong commitment there, too. Upholding workers' rights, reviewing how the UK encourages responsible business conduct in global supply chains. They highlight a nice example, the Shared Impact Project in Côte d'Ivoire with Fair Trade, Mars, and a local group. It funded savings groups for women, a maternity clinic, showing how ethical cocoa supply chains can actually empower communities and help fight child labor.
That's a positive example. And support for developing countries generally.
Yes, through schemes like the Developing Countries Trading Scheme, DCTS, it gives preferential market access to over 90 countries. Last year, that benefited over £12 billion worth of goods coming into the UK.
Okay, so bringing it all together, how is this whole strategy overseen? Governance.
Good governance is stressed. For free trade agreements, they've enhanced parliamentary scrutiny, actually doubled the time. MPs get to look at new comprehensive FTAs, from 10 days to 20 days. More transparency.
And they listen to people while developing it.
Apparently so. The strategy itself was built on a lot of engagement, over 220 submissions from businesses, other organizations. And they say they're continually working on improving trade data, especially for services, so future policy is based on better evidence.
Right, so if we were to sum it all up.
I'd say the UK's trade strategy comes across as, well, pragmatic, but also ambitious. It's clearly designed for navigating this complex, turbulent world we're in. It plays to the UK's strength services, high-tech industries. It diversifies partnerships. And it aims to give businesses a flexible toolkit to work with.
And the underlying goal.
It seems to be about achieving secure, resilient growth, but also ensuring prosperity is shared fairly, making sure trade works for the economy, yes, but also aligns with the nation's values. It's about being realistic about the challenges, definitely, but also determined to stay open and adapt quickly.
Okay. A complex picture, but a clear direction, perhaps.
Which leaves us with maybe one final thought to chew on. As technology keeps racing ahead, reshaping global trade, what kind of completely unexpected, maybe invisible sectors might emerge next? Things beyond even our current idea of services. What could be the next frontier for international exchange? And, how will future trade strategies have to adapt again to harness these totally new kinds of value?
That's a really intriguing question to leave things on, as the world keeps changing so fast. That's all for this deep dive into the UK's trade strategy. Thanks for joining us.